Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 12 of the AFL season was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of contests. We had two absolute thrillers on Friday and Saturday nights, with the Blues continuing their resurgence, pipping the Cats by 4 points. And then we saw the Bulldogs do the exact same over the Magpies in two of probably the best games of the year, I reckon. On the flip side of that, Thursday night footy delivered one of the most one-sided first halves of the year, with the Hawks slicing through the Saints and keeping them goalless. And then on Saturday, 13 goals between Curnow and Heaney led the Swans to a 114-point drubbing over the threadbare Tigers. The Crows, Power, Suns and Kangaroos all had a rest and will return this week in week 2 of the 5 mid-season bye rounds. I had a pretty good weekend. Always weird not having the Crows play. Much more relaxing weekend of footy than usual. But for me and my fantasy sides, a combination of injuries and bye guys that had me putting up some pretty weak sides. No surprises, I have a fair few Crows across my leagues, so I was obviously missing them. But fortunately in my home league, I was playing my brother, who has even more Crows than me, and we both put up some pretty stinky scores, and I got the chocolates. And my highest score, funnily enough, was someone I grabbed from the pool for a 1 week play in Peter Laddams, with a nice clean ton, which was enough to get 2 votes in the league medal, which I did find pretty funny because I'm probably just going to drop him this week, and now he's polled. How good is the league medal, by the way, for those that play on the Keeper fantasy platform and those who played on Ultimate Footy back in the day? When Ultimate Footy went down, I did the league medal votes manually on Excel using the same formula. So it's pretty cool that now we have Keeper Fantasy back, that the league medal's there. Actually, for those who do have the league medal and have renamed it, what have you called it? We call ours the Rocky Swan medal, and it's been that name for many years now. But yeah, let me know what the medal's name, who the medal's named after in your leagues. Be fascinated to see some of the names that come through. Anyway, on to the podcast. On Finders Keepers this week, I'll go through my waiver picks from last week, see how they fared, drop some names that I think would be worth a stab this week, and then I'll look at the things I noticed across round 2 before finishing with a couple of questions from you, the listener. Last week for the waiver picks, I gave 5 names for regular leagues and another 3 for deeper leagues. So let's have a look back at who I put up and how they went. And number 1, pretty happy with this, Will Hayward, who was owned by 65% of all Keeper and Dynasty leagues on the Keeper Fantasy platform this time last week. That's gone up to 81%. So lots of people saw what he's been doing. He's been on a really nice trot, and he scored 83 this week in the win against Geelong. And that's now 4 weeks in a row over 80. And I think maybe 6 out of 7 over 80 or something like that. He's really playing well. And watching the game, I really noticed him because Hayward's scoring had sort of crept up on me. I didn't realise he'd been that consistent and kept doing it. And yeah, watching him, he's up the ground, he's taken lots of marks, he's really into it. And yeah, it's been a great sort of, great silver lining for what's been a disappointing season so far at Carlton. But he's been a great recruit, and yeah, I think if you grabbed him, you'd be pretty happy so far. Not so much with the next guy, Steve Cornelio. I got seduced by his 95, I think it was the week before, playing a bit more midfield time. He was owned by 61% of leagues, and that only went up to 67. So, people aren't fooled, just not as seduced by him as I was. He scored 19 and got injured. I mean, yeah, it's hard to really knock him, but I guess that's just where he's at in his career. He's really, it's not often that he has long sustained runs without an injury. And yeah, if he dropped a 19 on you, that would have been very painful, particularly in the bye rounds. The next guy was Phoenix Gothard, who blew everyone's socks off a week ago, and he was at 39% ownership, which blew out to 62% on the back of that 130 he scored last week. I recommended him, but I did sort of say, approach with caution. He's not going to do that every week, clearly. But he scored 72. So, in a game where a lot of Giants scored, 72 is on the quieter side, but it's still a very nice score from him, and I think you'd be pretty happy with that. The next guy is Carl Warner from Freo, someone I've spoken about a fair bit on this pod, probably more last year. He was on a nice run, and a week ago he was on 54% ownership. That shot up to 66% now. And he scored 75, continuing his nice run. That's a 5-game average of 80. And I think he's he's becoming what I kind of thought he'd be. Just that really handy +6, just an extra pair of hands back there to go with Ryan and Jordan Clark. And he's probably doing a bit of what I thought, the sort of scoring I was kind of expecting from Judd McVie, who came across from Melbourne. So great signs for Warner. And if you nabbed him, you'd be pretty happy. The next guy, the last guy of the 5, was Sam Marshall for Brisbane. His ownership was 51%. It went up to 53%. And I liked his score. I like him. But I did flag last week there's a chance he'll be made one of the scapegoats for the loss, and he was omitted. So he didn't play this week. But I reckon if you grabbed him, just sit on him for a bit, because the Lions lost again. And I think they'll continue to move things around, and I'm sure Marshall will get another go soon. For the deeper leagues, I had as my number 1 Rory Lobb for the Bulldogs, and I was really big on him last week. He was only owned in 13% of leagues. That's gone up to 27%, but that's really not much for a guy who scored a ton last week in the number 1 ruck role. So it was the second week he'd been the main ruck, and he scored a nice ton playing against Gawn, thanks to laying 10 tackles. That was a week ago, and my recommendation came not expecting English to be back. And surprisingly, English was back, and I reckon that's why his ownership, Lob, didn't go up as much as I thought it would. But even with English back, they kept Lob in that ruck role as the second ruck, and it was a pretty good split. I think it was maybe roughly 60-40 overall in English's way, and Lobb scored 82, laying another 8 tackles to go with last week's 10. So he's not in my official recommended ones this week, because I don't like to do the same guy twice, but seriously, Lobb, 27% owned. He's not the typical guy you look for in a keeper league. He's quite old. But this is a nice role for him, and with defender status, I think he'd fit in very nicely in most sides. Nathan O'Driscoll was the next one I had. He's someone that sort of teased us a bit over the years, and he put up a nice score the week before. So that saw his ownership go from 44% up to 60%. And this week he scored a 70, no real change in the role, mostly on the wing with a little bit of inside time and a nice score. So nothing too exciting. I think the appeal with O'Driscoll is if he ever does land an inside role permanently, I think he'll be one to absolutely go for. But if you grabbed him in a deep league last week, you'd be pretty happy. Not so with the last guy, Ben Miller for Richmond. And it's funny because he put up some really nice scores for a couple of times in a row, and I thought, I'm not recommending him, but I did last week. I just thought it looks like the scoring is going to continue. His ownership went from 27% up to 37%, and this week he scored 38. So I think that fun scoring run is officially over, and you can let him go back into the pool without too much hesitation, I would have thought. So who do I like this week? Well, it's getting harder and harder. I know I say this every week to find guys, because I don't like to say the same names I've already said in the same year, so it does limit my options. But look, there's some interesting names in this week's list, and I wouldn't go all out to grab these guys, so definitely don't waste a valuable waiver spot on any of maybe the first guy, but no one else. Anyway, let me roll through the names. It's a combination of deep leagues and regular leagues, and I'll give you my reasons. The first guy is Billy Wilson for Carlton. He's in 37% of leagues currently. Scored a really nice 90 on the weekend in the win over Geelong, and they used him a lot in that back line. He took some kick-ins. He's been around a few years. He's 20 now. And before this week, he actually scored 65 and 78 in the weeks leading up to his 90. So it's not one out of the box. He's been doing this for a few weeks. And I just spoke about him, I reckon, in one of the last episodes of Finders Keepers last year, because he scored 85 in round 24, and that made me notice him a bit. Definitely noticed him last year at the end of the year. And yeah, something about him. He's got that long blonde hair, very easy to pick out when you're watching. Yeah, I reckon he's worth a go in the back line. He's part of Carlton's future, and they're starting to have a look at those guys now. So, yeah. Number 2, bit of an interesting one, Peter Laddams for the Swans. 28 years old. He's never really made it at the top level, but he's hung around. Got his chance on the weekend with Brodie Grundy rested. Owned in 57% of leagues, and he scored a nice, clean 100 against the Tigers. Now, I actually grabbed him when I saw he was named, and my plan was to drop him this week. But I'm hearing that there's a good chance they're going to keep him in and play 2 rucks this week. And with the forward status, Laddams, yeah, look, he might not score another ton, but he's still a pretty handy guy to have. So if you did grab him for the 1 week play like I did, maybe you can hold him for another week and just see what happens. I think they've got the Saints this week. So Tom DeConning and Rowan Marshall, it would make sense for Swans to load up with Grundy and Laddams. Next guy, number 3, is Ryan Burns for the Saints. 25 years old. He's been around for, a long time now, and it's just never... He's certainly played plenty of games. He's just never really got a stranglehold on that side and a best 22, 23 spot. And it looked like he was going to get that this year, and then he was out for a fairly long period with injury. Back a few weeks now, and scored 92 off the wing in this game. Has defender status. He's owned in 18% of leagues. You know, if you look at his scores before this week, they're pretty putrid, but I think he's worth a crack because he looked really good in this game, and I'm just wondering if this is the beginning of him getting some consistent and some good scores for us in the fantasy world. Next guy is Ruben Jinby for the Eagles, owned in 38% of leagues. He's only 21, very early in his career, and has settled in the last few years as a key defender, and his scoring has certainly taken a hit because of that. But I've always liked him as someone who could develop into a pretty good scoring defender because of his ability to read the ball, and he's just so he just throws himself at it, and he does get the ball. So before this week, he'd had a long stretch of scoring in the 60s, which I think is pretty good in a deep league, and this week he scored a 79. So could be someone to add and maybe just sit on him for a bit longer and see what develops in that West Coast back line. Blake Acres came in for his first game of the season for Carlton. He's owned in 45% of leagues. Scored 75, which is probably lower than what I thought he had scored watching the game. I just felt like he was everywhere. He was quite important, playing on the wing. He's 30 now, Acres, so, not for a rebuilding list, but certainly someone that can score. You could pop him into that midfield at, say, M6, M7, and if he's playing, I think he's definitely got the ability to put up some pretty good scores this year at least. Now, the last two are real Hail Marys, but I want to explain it, and this is for very deep leagues. Looking to just grab someone now, And I really like the look of Bailey McDonald for Hawthorn. I was watching him pretty closely because I picked him up in my classic side. But he's owned in 6% of leagues, and he only scored 46, so nothing to get excited about. He's 21 years old. I don't know, every time I saw him, he was doing really tidy things. He looked like a really good player back there, composed. And I don't know, I just feel like he's going to be someone that keeps a spot in that back six and develops into a pretty good scorer for us. And look, it might not be for a few more years when guys like Amon and Jarman Impey and the like have moved on, but I don't know. I'm not saying grab him. If you're not in a deep league, it's going to be hard to justify it, but absolutely keep an eye on Bailey McDonald. And then the last one is a similar story, not someone I'd be fielding anytime soon, but Job Shanahan for West Coast. He's owned in 19% of leagues, scored a 40, hasn't scored much more than that in most games this year, but as a second year key forward, 19 years old, every time I watch West Coast, this guy just catches my eye. I don't know what it is. He's just something about him. I reckon he's going to be a star, and I reckon he'll be a worthy fantasy forward to own in years to come. Is that 7? That was 7. So yeah, there's my 7 names. Like I said, if you play in a league where the waiver spot is very valuable and it's smart to just hold it and save it for the next week, maybe this week do that, because none of these names are absolute dead set pick me guys. But if you're just throwing darts, I reckon these guys, particularly Billy Wilson, I really like them. So hopefully I've given you something to at least think about with these names. And if you don't target them, they're probably going to sit in your league free for a little bit yet. Just watch them this week, watch them next week. And if you start to see what I'm seeing, jump on. All right, let's jump into round 12, the things I noticed across the round. Starting with Thursday night footy, and I did watch this game from start to finish, even though it was... Look, on the scoreboard, St Kilda Hawthorn I'm talking about, the scoreboard told you it was a very boring game, but I actually found the first half fascinating because Hawthorn were like... It was almost like playing a video game and they were on the computer's hardest mode, like cheat mode. Everything they did and touched turned to gold. And every time St Kilda had some opportunity, they fumbled and they dropped the ball, and it was quite strange to see it because St Kilda aren't that bad, and I didn't think Hawthorn were that good. Anyway, I enjoyed it. It was entertaining nonetheless. The Hawks holding St Kilda goalless in the first half before going on to win comfortably. So, for St Kilda, Brad Hill, what a great year he's having. Really impressive season. He scored 93. He had 30 touches, and he actually spent more time at half-back after Sam Flanders went down. So this is really interesting to me because he's been so good this year, but I think he's been mostly wing, maybe half-forward. So if he goes behind the ball and picks up that role, he's going to go bananas. The Sam Flanders injury was bloody devastating. I've got him in one of my keepers. I traded him in about 3-4 weeks ago, just before he went to halfback and started scoring tons, and I was loving him. Such a shame for St Kilda, obviously, but to a lesser extent for my team. So he's out for 12 months with an Achilles, if you hadn't heard the news there. Ryan Burns, as I said in the waivers segment, he's an interesting player. He's been there for a while and, really started to deliver on the promise on the weekend. And a funny story about Burns, I drafted him in the new Dynasty League we started this year, the one without waivers, and we just had our mid-season draft, and I just delisted Ryan Burns. So, yeah, I don't think anyone was more annoyed to see him score 92 on the weekend than me. But anyway, that's how it goes sometimes. Jack Silvani had an interesting role change. He moved to the forward line in the second half for the Saints and looked pretty unbelievable, to be fair, as the Saints finally started to get into the game a bit. He scored 77 points in the second half, finishing with 106. Kicked 3 goals, took 10 marks. So I reckon he'll be playing forward for a little bit longer, Silvani. Not sure that really helps or hinders his fantasy scoring. He's always been a guy that can score, but has never been reliable. For the Hawks, it was great to see Will Day return to footy, and I thought he impressed in 62% time on ground. He scored a 64, and yeah, he just, sometimes when players are so injured, like so frequently injured, the reputation sometimes precedes them. So they're out for so long, we just think, wow, he's so good, can't wait to see him play. And I reckon I'm guilty of thinking, is Will Day really as good as we remembered? And yeah, he is. Even just in the small glimpses of this game, you could see this guy's an absolute gun, and fingers, toes, everything crossed, not just from Hawthorn fans, I think footy fans, that this guy just stays fit so we can see it for longer. Yeah, great to see Will Day back out on the park. Bailey McDonald, spoke about him in the waivers as well. Not a big game stat-wise, but yeah, like I said, really looks assured and confident on the ball coming out of the back line. And then lastly, in that back line as well, Josh Weddle, he scored 70. He hasn't really scored anything exciting in the last few weeks. He's gone 80, 61, 70, which is actually pretty good for him, to be fair. But what I've really enjoyed is he's sort of played the same role. It looks like they're finally settling him down in that half-back interceptor role, where he still has license to get up the ground, get up the wing, go forward and whatnot. But he's got a sort of a locked-in role at half-back, and I think that's where he'll develop into a very good fantasy player, hopefully sooner rather than later. On to Friday night, the Blues and the Cats, and I loved this game. It was a great game of footy, with the Blues just holding on. Jagger Smith, the young fella, he scored a 90, and he's still yet to ton, but everything's looking good for his fantasy prospects. He's so good that the Cats sent Ocean Mullen to him at halftime. Mullen had gone to Cripps, was unable to really get the job done on him. And Jagger Smith was really getting off the chain, so they sent the Mullen man to him. Recently got forward status, Jagger Smith. I think owners, can we call them long-suffering Jagger Smith owners? We probably can, because most would have drafted him with pick 1 or 2 start of last year and then watched the kid do an ACL. So great reward, and yeah, great for the Smith owners out there. Billy Wilson, I spoke about him just before. Scored a 90. I noticed him, throughout the game, and yeah, averaging 78 in his last 3, as I said, looking like a pretty nice player for him. Lockie Cowan, I was looking forward to talking about Cowan, because I've got him in a lot of my leagues, and I've gone in between of sort of giving up on him, but I'm hanging fat. He's gone 2 80s in a row before this round, and now he's got a 75. But he played a very accountable role on Jeremy Cameron and was able to still find plenty of the ball, taking 9 marks. It just makes me really optimistic that there will be games where he's not locking down on a player like Cameron, and he'll score much better. I noticed as well, whenever the Cats kicked a point, I was sort of looking. He never took the kick-ins, Cowan, but I was hoping for him to receive a kick from the kick-in, and he just sort of never did. He never really got those cheap +6s, so he really found a way to get to 9 marks, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with what I saw. For Geelong, Connor O'Sullivan scored 86. That's back-to-back 80s now for him, and I just love this kid. His defensive marking is so good, and it has been since he debuted. He's taken 20 marks in his last 2 games, and I think he's inching closer and closer to being someone that we can trust in fantasy to sit in our back lines. Lawson Humphreys was on track for another great score, but unfortunately went down with, I think it was an ankle injury. It didn't look good, and I haven't heard anything about it since, so I guess we'll wait and see with more news. But yeah, real shame. He was on 78, had probably a career game last week, and he's starting to really build. So fingers crossed he's okay. Look, if he's not though, I'm wondering what could the effect be on the rest of the side. You know, this was probably one of the rare games where Geelong's midfield got absolutely smashed. You know, the Carlton midfield of Cripps, Walsh, Jagger Smith, Hewitt, like they just smashed them. And it was really interesting to me that James Worpel wasn't even an emergency in this game, showing just how far back he is. So I wonder if Humphreys is out, does Tanner Bruhn go back to halfback? Because he was there at times in this game, then he was in the middle, and he didn't really offer much on the night. So does Bruhn go back to halfback? Do they bring in Worpel or maybe Jack Bowes, someone just to help strengthen that midfield? And the midfield is strong enough. It's got, you know, Bailey Smith, Atkins, Holmes. They threw Dangerfield in there at the end as well, but don't know. Just looked like they were missing a piece, Geelong. So if Humphreys is down, maybe Bruhn goes back, maybe we see Worpel come in. Saturday we had Sydney and Richmond, and yeah, this was as one side as it gets for the poor old Tigers. Sydney with a big win. Isaac Heaney put up just ridiculous numbers. 32 touches, 7 marks, 7 tackles, and 5 goals for a fantasy score of 163. What else can you say about this guy? Absolute star. And I must say, I'm probably guilty of underrating Heaney. I've seen him as an option in Classic. I've seen people talk about trading for him in keepers, and I just think, I don't know if I rate him that highly in a fantasy sense. But my goodness, when he is on, he is on. Charlie Curnow finally found his mojo and rewarded, I'd say, frustrated owners who, you know, dealt with a bit of an underwhelming season at Carlton last year, found his way to the Swans, and I think we all kind of thought he'd absolutely, have a big scoring spike, but it's been a slow burn. But this was big. 8 goals, scored 130, and yeah, I think that's what you want to see. Now, Tom McCartan's really interesting. He scored 113, and I had a look at his scoring run, and it really took me by surprise. He scored 113 in this game, but that gives him a 5-week average of 95. And I don't know how he's doing it, because he's not taking kick-ins. He's just grabbing lots of plus 6s, intercepting a lot, and just finding a way to score. A bit like Callum Wilkie at St Kilda. Not to that level, but geez, go and have a look at his last 5 weeks. I bet you'll be quite surprised and impressed. And then lastly, Peter Laddams, who I spoke about earlier, finally got that look at AFL level again. And did enough to keep his spot, I reckon. Played that ruck forward role with Sydney playing the Saints and up against Tom De Koning and Rowan Marshall this week. Brisbane and Freo just continue on their merry way. I think is that 11 wins in a row now, Dockers fans? I'm sure you'll correct me if I got that wrong. And another loss for the Lions. So really interesting. Fantasy-wise, Darcy Wilmot, 125, really big game from him. Interesting to look at his scoring average with and without Zorko, because Zorko's missed 5 games now total for this season. And in those 5 games, Wilmot goes at 101. And then in the 7 games with Zorko, he's averaging 83. So it's a pretty big jump. And it makes sense. He's taken the kick-ins. He's really taking more of the Zorko role. So, yeah, that's really good news for Wilmot owners. Zorko's had a setback. He's going to miss another, 5 or 6 weeks. And so is Kadeem Coleman, unfortunately. He's injured again. So Wilmot is going to be the man. It's now about who else goes back there for the Lions. Jasper Fletcher's been a bit off the pace this year. And my fear with him heading into this season was he'd get stuck on a wing again. I wonder if he just starts to get a bit more more of a ball in the halfback role, which would be good for his owners. And then, who else goes back there this week? Jared Berry is an interesting guy that's come in, can play wing, can play on the ball, but he can play behind the ball. And they've done that in the past, I reckon, with him. So just keep an eye on Jared Berry this week. If he ends up at halfback, could be a nice option. So back to Wilmot. Really nice game. He had 26 touches, 24 of them were kicks, took 12 marks. Happy days. Not so happy for Hugh McCluggage owners. It's not been a great year for him. He had that bad injury. He missed a lot of footy, and they've eased him back in. And then on the weekend, and I didn't watch this game, so I don't know if he's still injured or if he was afflicted by something, but this was his worst fantasy score since round 12, 2020. And that, if you want to apply the times 1.25 that we used to do because of the shortened quarters in that season, if you want to remove that, before that, he hasn't scored this bad since round 19, 2018. So he finished with a 46 from 78% time on ground. Not sure what his problem is, but he can't be right. Like, this guy is so much better than what he's done the last 2 weeks. And watch with interest this week. And as an owner in my home league, come on, McCluggage. This is not good. For Freo, nothing really stood out. They didn't have any fantasy tons. Just a real even spread. That's kind of Freo these days. A lot of the fantasy guns from Fremantle in recent years, guys like Andy Brayshaw, Caleb Sarong, Luke Ryan, Jordan Clark, they're really not doing much. It's a different game style now, and it's much more spread out and low scoring. In fact, 3 of the top 4 highest scorers were key forwards for the Dockers: Tracy, Amos, and Paddy Voss. Interesting. But they're winning. Saturday night footy, we had the Dogs and the Pies, and as I said, like the Blues and the Cats, one of the great games of the year, I reckon. Real spectacle, high scoring, and the Doggies prevailed in a thriller. Riley Sanders, I'm just going to keep talking about this boy. Can I claim him as my boy? Probably not. He's pretty well known and liked. But hey, I've been talking about him. This midfield role is stuck, and that's now 3 tons in a row. Fantastic. I still don't have him in anything. I was going to get him in Classic this week, but changed. Reckon I might have to pull him in this week. Rory Lobb featured in my waiver segment as well with an 82. Really impressed with him. Tim English returned, but Lobb still did a lot of rucking. And another nice score and another 8 tackles to go with his 10 last week is really impressive. For Collingwood, something really interesting with the centre ball ups, right? Not including Darcy Cameron, McStay, and Billy Frampton, the 3 guys that were used as rucks, not including those names. Collingwood had 12 different players attend a centre ball up in this game. 12. It's half the bloody team got a crack on the ball. So, you don't see that often. Very unusual. And I don't really know what it means, but they're obviously just having a look to see what they can do to mix things up in there. One guy who ain't moving out of there, Jordan De Goey. And he's definitely the fantasy story for the Pies at the minute. A 127 in this game, fantastic. But he's really showing now what he can do when he's healthy and in the right midfield role. He's got 3 tons in his last 4 and has a 5-week average of 104. For someone that was probably picked up in the preseason redrafting keepers with forward status, I reckon that's going to be one of the picks of the year. He's flying. Moving on to the Sunday games, of which there were only 2 this week, because we did just have 7 games for the round instead of the usual 9. Melbourne and GWS duked it out. I think they were up north, weren't they, in Alice Springs? And GWS got continued their good form, and another win for them. So for the D's, the big sort of fantasy story for them was Max Heath being omitted from the side after a bit of a run helping Big Gawny, which saw a bit of an impact on Gawn's scoring. He's been playing a bit more forward. So to see Heath out, this was really good for Max Gawn owners because he was the solo ruck again. Now, he scored 123, had a big game, as Gawn does. But interestingly, his ruck contests and CBAs were actually quite similar to what he's been doing in the last few weeks with Heath. So this week he was just sharing with Van Ruin and Myercheck. Yeah, so Van Ruin, Myercheck sort of did the role that Heath had been doing the last few weeks. So yeah, Gawn had a big week, but the role, certainly from a ruck split point of view, wasn't that different to the last few weeks. For GWS, they owned the footy. They had 6 tons, and there was lots of ball for those halfback types. I'm talking Lockie Ash. Lockie Ash, Iden, Whitfield, Fonte, and Himmelberg took 53 marks between them, and the entire Melbourne side took 85. So that just shows you a bit about how dominant, how possessive they were in the back half, and some big scores resulted from it. And none bigger than Lockie Ash himself with a 131. For the second week in a row, he remained in that regular halfback role, which was interesting because it looked like he went back to that role from the midfield last week because Whitfield was out. Now Whitfield returns, but they sent Ash back as well. 34 touches, 11 marks, plenty of kick-ins. And much like, I reckon, coaches of Archie Roberts at Essendon, they'll be thinking, just leave him at halfback, please, because that's where he carves it up. All right, last game was Sunday night footy. You know I love Sunday night footy. Just when you think the weekend's over and you're getting ready for the working week, there's another game of footy. You beauty. This wasn't much of a beauty, I must be honest. West Coast and Essendon. It was pretty wet and windy, blustery conditions, and West Coast, they dominated really from the start. Essendon had a little patch. I don't know if it was the second quarter. There was a little period of the game where the Bombers looked really good, but it didn't last, and Eagles kicked away. And I think the margin was only 5 goals in the end, but it was pretty one-sided. Actually, I think this was the first time all year I've fallen asleep watching the footy, and I don't think that's necessarily on this game. I just think I was particularly tired, but it does tell you a little bit about it as a spectacle. Plenty of keeper league takeaways, though, as always, and Milan Murdoch for West Coast continues to impress in his first season and in recent times as a deadly halfback tagger. This time he took Archie Roberts down, and that's quite a nice little CV he's building the last 3 weeks. Lockie Whitfield, Josh Dacos, and now Archie Roberts. He beat them all, and in this game he kicked 3 goals himself, scoring 97. This guy's a legend. Tyler Young, in his first year coming across from Richmond to the Eagles, he's actually played every game this year as an Eagle. He's approaching 50 games of his career, and this was a career-high score and a career-high possession count with 26 touches and a score of 93. Nothing really to tell me that he's just all of a sudden going to be a really big scorer, but he did look really good, took the game on, and I think he's like a key defender who can sort of float and intercept, but I don't know a lot about him, but I really like this game from him. Tyler Young. Job Shanahan, I spoke about him briefly at the start. He's not posting the scores yet, but just watch this guy. I think we're going to be talking about him in a meaningful way in about 3-4 years. For the Bombers, Elijah Sardis was back in the side, and I've been a pretty vocal supporter of not necessarily saying this guy's a jet, but just bemoaning the fact that he's never really been given much of a run. I don't think he's ever played more than 3 games in a row outside of maybe sub-affected games, something like that. But good to see him back in the side. He scored 82. He had 26 touches with 5 clearances, 3 of them centre clearances. But I think his Achilles heel has been his disposal and maybe decision making, and you could see that in this game. He wins a lot of footy. He does burn it a bit. So that's something he just has to fix if he wants to stay in this side. Only laid 2 tackles too. He probably doesn't lay enough tackles as a midfielder. That's another thing he's got to get better at. But if he does, he stays in the side, he's going to be a fantasy jet because he's a magnet. Similar to Sardis is Will Setterfield. He's obviously much older, been around a lot longer, but he was back in the side again. This time he got a sprinkling of CBAs. His only other game this year was just off the wing. He scored 92. He's just the sort of player that if he's playing, you can trust him to bang out a 90 for you because he's a hard tackler. He knows how to find the ball. It's just whether he keeps his spot in the side. And I think last year he had a really good run, but then it was injuries. So it's always injuries or just not the player they want in there. So change of coach, I reckon we'll see a bit more of Sardis and Setterfield in the back half of this year. Now, someone they won't be shifting out of the way is Sullivan Roby. Scored 71, but he, to me, he's easily the highlight of Essendon's season so far. They've obviously not had a great year, but seeing him debut and play the way he does, he just doesn't look like a kid to me. Like when I watch, I'm like, how is that guy in his first year? He's got big body and he just plays like he's been there for years. And he's got the number 9 on the back. And every time I saw him in this game, just kept thinking of Jack Steele at St Kilda. Big tackles, very physical player. He laid 6 tackles in this game. Has the forward status. I think he's one of the best picks so far from last year's draft. And yeah, it's a big call. Will Dersman's doing pretty well himself, the number 1 pick. But yeah, I just think Roby is looking awesome. That was it. Yes, that's round 12. Everything I noticed. I'll jump into a couple of questions now from the listeners and then wrap up what's a bit of a shorter episode of Finders Keepers this week, just with the 7 games instead of 9. But before I do look at the questions, just a reminder, if you're enjoying Finders Keepers, please make sure you like, subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave a 5-star review too if you're feeling particularly generous. And make sure you're following the X page at FindKeepAFL to keep up to date with everything that's going on in the podcast, and use that as a way to reach out if you've got any questions, thoughts on keeper leagues, single season draft, anything footy, or if you've got trades that have gone down in your keeper leagues that you want me to look at on the podcast and review, send that through to me on X at FindKeepAFL. And with that, I've got a couple. The first one coming from at the Props on X, who has written through with a single season trade that they've just pulled off. Jake Waterman for Mitch Georgiades, and this was before the Essendon game. So I'm guessing you got Waterman because you named him first, and I think this is it's a pretty vanilla trade, right? Like you see it in the group chat. Group chat doesn't go off, does it? But it's a smart trade because obviously Georgiades was on the bye and Waterman was coming off a 48 the week before, and a good time to target him, and then he absolutely delivered for you on the weekend with a 98 against the Bombers, and he looked really good, Waterman. I think he's someone we've probably only just seen the beginning of what he could be potential wise. Didn't mention him in my game wrap, but yeah, he was everywhere in this game. Probably could have kicked a bag, to be fair. Interestingly, him and Georgiades have both kicked a goal at every game they've played this year, which is a very nice strike rate. And I think even with Georgiades on the bye and Waterman playing, I still think I like Waterman over Georgiades anyway for the rest of the season. So very nice trade. I think you'll be more than pleased with that one. Thanks for sending it through. And it's there's a real art to trading around the buys, and you can get players, you can get real good value on trades because someone might be absolutely desperate to field a side that they let a buy guy go, and you might actually be well stocked for that round. So this is a really good time to get busy with your trading in single season and keepers as well. So thanks for sending that through. And then on to the next one, which is good supporter of the podcast. Homes is where the heart is. That's at Patrick Dan 71167. And he's written in with a first team trade of a very slow Supercoach season. So they've got 8 coaches, 19 players on field, and only 4 keepers. Interesting. Some interesting numbers there for that league. Now, I'm not a big Supercoach guy. I've played it in the past. I have a pretty good understanding of the difference, but I will just flag that when I give my answer. So the trade is, for Patrick, he's written in, I traded Josh Lindsay and Darcy Wilson out and received Colby McKercher. So that's Josh Lindsay and Darcy Wilson for Colby McKercher. I don't know. See, I reckon I love McKercher, don't get me wrong, but the way Lindsay started and how Wilson's starting to look, I wonder if that's a bit much for McKercher, unless picks were involved as well. But the thing with McKercher is in Supercoach, even when he has that plum halfback role, I think a lot of the junk time scoring in that gets absorbed. Because they scale it all. I don't understand it all. I just know that guys who get a lot of easy footy towards the end of games, fantastic in fantasy, not as effective in Supercoach. I think you'll get the fruits of this trade when McKercher becomes a full-time midfielder, and that's not going to be for a couple of years yet. I think when he's a permanent midfielder, we're all going to see the best of him, and that's when he'll be a Supercoach star. But in the meantime, I don't know. Josh Lindsay, he's got that lethal left foot. Wasn't he like the best kick? Something like the best field kick in last year's draft? I'm not sure if I'd want to let him go in Supercoach. And then Darcy Wilson, probably hasn't been a Supercoach guy yet, particularly playing on the wing. But now he's playing more as an inside midfielder. I reckon his scores are probably starting to jump. So, look, overall, I do think I'd prefer to be on the side of Lindsay and Wilson. But that's probably for the next few years. Once McKercher becomes that full-time mid down the track, maybe that's when your trade will pay off. But again, I don't know Supercoach very well, but that's the way I see it. So thanks for sending that in. That is a big trade in whatever format you're playing. Some big names there indeed. And that'll do it for the questions and for Finders Keepers for another week. So thank you very much for listening. I'll be back next week, of course, to look at round 13, the second of the buys, and the easiest of the buys, because it's only the Giants and the Tigers who are off this week. So that means we'll have 8 games of footy, which is good, and most of our teams will be pretty fully stocked, assuming injuries haven't crippled your sides. But we are getting to that point of the year where we're starting to struggle to find the numbers. But after the buys, sides will reset, freshen things up, and I think all of our fantasy sides will look a bit better on the other side of it. But good luck. Enjoy the round. It starts on Thursday night. Crows and the Cats, and I'm very excited for this game. Big opportunity for Adelaide to get their season on track, and it doesn't get any tougher than Geelong. They always beat us. So looking forward to that. Good luck in fantasy. Good luck across all your leagues. I hope you have a great round, and I'll be back next week. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.